All right. Okay, so we have a great topic that I am super excited to talk with you about. It's actually a continuation of a topic that we talked about before when we talked about differentiation and meeting student needs. We actually talked about it in the context of learning objectives. So we're going to go back there. In the meantime, you can all respond in the chat. Let me know if you are new or if you are returning and where you are from, so that everybody can see where we are coming together from throughout the country and beyond. We've had people from Nigeria, we've had people from different parts of the world, and it is so nice to have folks returning. I'm not going to be in this corner for the entire time, but I will be here at the beginning. And if I'm looking to the side, it's just because I'm trying to read your chats and your responses as you are. Okay, so a bunch of new people as well as returnees. All right, and I hope that those of you who are returnees, I don't know if you missed me all that much, but happy post-Passover to you, and post-Easter for many of you celebrating. I'm not sure if the Easter season is fully over at this point, but I hope that you had a wonderful, restful, and relaxing holiday season. I sure did, and I'd love to show you a little bit about it because it was an absolutely fantastic holiday well, I'm going to jump in all that stuff in a second, but I just wanted to show you here, how I celebrated the holiday. It was like warm and so great in the land of Israel. It was just so wonderful to get away. And I hope that you guys were able to do that as well. And of course, of those of you who think I actually traveled to Israel this year, that was like so last year. This year we were stuck in New Jersey. When I say stuck, we were home. We were planning to be home anyway, but we were stuck in a different kind of way, and I'm sure many of you can commiserate what that means, what that looks like. But thankfully, we ate lots of matzah, and we survived physically and otherwise, and thankfully, we are here on the back end, and I am super excited to be back with you. So enjoyed those pictures, at least looking back at them, comparing one year to the next. It's astounding to see how different the world is at the moment. There's I'll just mention this because it does relate to Passover. There is, I wouldn't call it a custom, but there's an event where the priests, known as Kohanim, who offer a blessing to the people in Israel. It's daily. In the diaspora, it's only on the major holidays. And so there's an event at the Western Wall, the Kotel in Jerusalem, where many, many priests come, hundreds of them come, if not thousands, and then tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people come to receive the blessing. It's an unbelievable thing. It fills up the entire space and well beyond. I think last year they had 100,000 people. And then they showed a picture of what it looked like this year, and there were just 10 people praying, all socially distant, all removed one from the other. And it was like just shocking to see that discrepancy. So this is the new normal in which we live, but I'm glad that we're able to come together. I'm glad we're able to share ideas, inspiration, real learning, and the community that we've built is something I must tell you I'm extremely gratified with and extremely proud of, because these are hard times. Many of us, I don't know how many folks here are dealing with the real impact personally on the economic level, because I'd like to assume that your schools are still operating. It could be that in your particular cases, individuals are in fact affected, and that's unfortunate, anybody who is. My wife just got furloughed for a bunch of weeks. My work has been impacted because I'm not on site, which is what a lot of my work requires. And even my son, who's in ticket sales, who's having events at this time. There are no rock concerts, no Broadway shows, no sporting events. So a lot of us have been impacted in a real way, financially and otherwise. And so for me to be able to come here and spend time with you, people who I'm getting to know slowly but surely, and of course the new people, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. It's very gratifying for me, and it creates an opportunity for me to share something with you. And so I'm so thankful, like I said, and I really hope that we can use the time together to talk about something which I think is well known, but not necessarily so well understood from a practical application level. And the goal of all of my webinars is to make it relevant and practical and allow you to really understand what it is that you need to be doing, or how we can take concrete action to improve our instruction. And I think that this is particularly relevant for remote learning, because in a regular classroom, there are other ways by which you can engage. You can engage with your presence, you can engage with your nonverbals, you can engage with a variety of things that when it comes to virtual learning, we all know we're much more limited. So the more that we can be thinking about different types of activities, different levels of engagement, different cognitive demand type pieces that are going to layer the learning and differentiate and provide opportunity for different students to learn in their appropriate and respective ways, the better off this is going to be for everybody. Now, for those of you who are new, I just wanted to let you know a couple of things on the logistical side. I am at home with my wife and 6 kids. My workspace and my presentation space is not fully enclosed. And so there is the possibility that there will be slight intrusion, but everybody has been forewarned to please keep it quiet where I am. So if you hear any background noise, I do apologize in advance. Usually it's pretty quiet, and in most cases we'll get our learning done. So I'm excited. I hope you are excited. For those of you who've just been staring at the screen, wondering what this is, I actually changed it for the school leaders because some of you probably were memorizing the old one anyway. But I'm a former teacher and school leader, and that's really my passion. That's really where I kind of identify at my core. Since 2013, I've moved into executive and leadership coaching, organizational consulting. So I've broadened my work quite a bit, but at my heart, I'm still a teacher. And at my heart, I really want to help the educational community in particular grow and develop, nurture new skills, and really move the needle within your respective organizations, and frankly, for each of your schools and students independently. And I would actually mention, if I may, I'll talk about it later with the upcoming webinars, but I have one scheduled on Thursday about teacher leadership. And I think it's a very important topic. If you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to take a look at it when I share the links, and I would also encourage you to register if you feel that it would add value for you. So just a quick question, because I've been talking for a while and I've had the camera on the entire time. For me, it's a slight distractor. For you, I have no idea. It may be something you prefer because you get to see an actual face besides for the one you see temporarily on the screen, or it may be something that you'd rather remove. So if we could quickly survey, would you rather keep or remove? You could just write the word keep or remove in the chat, and that will let me know if I should be keeping the video or killing the video for now. Oh my goodness, and I didn't even brush my hair properly today. So I appreciate that, everybody. Thank you, thank you. Okay, that means that I'm going to keep it at least for now. If that changes at any point in time, I am happy to do so. No offense will be taken. Okay, so let's move on from all that goodness. A couple of announcements. I'm noticing some of you are still responding only to all panelists, so I finally decided to put it into the PowerPoint itself. Please set your chat to all panelists and attendees. You could click on that at the bottom left where it says 2 with a colon. There is a drop-down option, and please choose all panelists and attendees. And a number of you have asked me for and received certificates for participating in these webinars. I actually took the step finally of uploading this to my website. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be sharing links throughout the oh, I didn't include this one in my little thingy over here, but I have it over here. So please go to impactfulcoaching.com/toolkit. I would encourage you to go there now if you want to, just to kind of have that open. But if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, because there are a number of giveaways that I have there, at the very bottom of that page, I do have a link where you could just access a DIY certificate. So I'm going to see if I can pull this up real quick so that I can share it with you in the chat itself. That was easy enough to do. So let's drop that in there. Okay. So if you go to the bottom of the page, you will see the link. Okay. I hope that that was clear. I hope that you're able to open things. And again, I would encourage you to open links as I share them and then refer back to them later at your convenience. Okay. So certificates are available. They'll be available for, indefinitely. And you can just grab one at any time that's convenient for you. If you've attended multiple sessions and you haven't gotten them yet, take one, even save it if you want to your computer, and just, repurpose it each time you want to go ahead and print a new one for yourself. I'm sorry I'm not personalizing all of them for you, but I hope you understand. Thankfully, I've had such an incredible response to these webinars. There'd be no way for me as, in my relative small space and limited manpower to go ahead and personalize all of these for you. So it's DIY, but I think it's still worthwhile if they will add value for you in any purpose that you have. So one more quick survey before we jump in. Just curious, can you identify yourself, please, if you are here if you are a teacher, please put the letter T. You could raise your hand as well, but I think in the chat would be great. If you are a school leader or principal, let's just do P. Let's choose between those two for now. Okay, lots of principals, lots of teachers. Okay, specific subjects are not so important to me for the moment, but I'm just curious to see. So it almost looks like a 50-50 split so far. Obviously hard for me to gauge exactly, probably skewing a little bit more towards teacher. All right, so that was question number one. And here then goes question number two. All right, so follow along with me as I ask you this question. How interested, from 1 being the lowest to 10 being the highest? So in other words, a ranking or rating from 1 to 10, and you can be obviously somewhere in between as well, are you in learning more about an ongoing professional growth opportunity that blends learning with idea sharing in a safe, supportive, small group environment? So in other words, instead of a massive webinar with hundreds, tens, if not hundreds of participants, a much smaller group setting, think 6 to 10 people typically. Think of it in the terms of a mastermind or a comparable type of offer where participants are coming on a regular basis, spending an hour together a week, learning, sharing ideas, and doing so in a way that is supportive for each other and whatnot. Okay, so there's a range here, which is not surprising, and that's fine. I do want to let you know that I'm going to be putting into the link putting into the chat 2 different links here for those of you who would be willing to. I mean, I'd love to get your feedback. And so I'm going to put them in here, and I'm hopeful that you can find the one that is most appropriate for you. But I just shared 2 links, as you will see. I'm going to share them probably again because the number, it's going to shoot up real quick in the chat. There is a Mastermind Forum and information form that I've created for a school leadership mastermind. There is also one that I've created for a teacher mastermind. Each one would be structured in a similar way, but obviously with a different clientele, a different focus area, and a lot of it driven, frankly, by the participants. So I'm looking for people who are highly motivated to learn, go deeper, to really be vulnerable in a way. In other words, to be willing to talk about challenges and struggles, and at the same time be open to the support and the ideas and the collaboration, and share them as well, right? Share your experiences, share your knowledge, share your intuition and all of your gifts with each other, so that the ultimate outcome would be individuals who are growing in whatever metric that's ultimately measured in. So whether that is in terms of classroom management, if you're a teacher, or communication skills, or if it's a school leader dealing with some of the soft skills or other, maybe even technical elements of your work, you're growing in a way that it's not just, oh, there's a webinar available, I'll go grab it because it's good learning, but it's something very specific to me that I'm developing a community around. So anyone who is interested, I'm going to share those links one more time, and possibly even again in a subsequent email, but at least you have them now. I would strongly encourage anyone who is interested to please weigh in, because your voice matters. I want to hear from you. I want to make this as effective and as useful an offering as I can. I will tell you, it is not a free offering like these webinars are free. That is not a free offering. There would be a cost involved with it. My goal is to make it possible for as many people as possible to participate. So I'm going to try to do it in a way that allows that to happen. But nonetheless, if you think that a offer like this is of interest to you, and if you're ready to grow and take things to the next level, and to me, this is a fantastic opportunity time-wise, because we have flexibility in our schedule we typically don't have, unfortunately, but it's a reality. And that's what's allowing so many people to come to these webinars. That's what's allowing so many people to join in a variety of different ways. And so if you're able to participate in something deeper, if by the end of this year, you look back and you say, I took Corona and I kicked it in the rear end, so to speak, and I learned through this time and I grew, and I came back next year as a better, more established, more confident, more collaborative and better networked professional. think about all of the opportunity that we have now that we never would have thought we would have otherwise. So that's why I'm offering this. I think it's a great time. I think it's a great opportunity. And if I could be part of your continued learning and your continued growth, it would be truly a humbling blessing for me and an opportunity for me to grow as well. So that's the little pitch there. And you can find out everything you need, at least for now, on that link. And we could talk about more privately offline if that is in fact what you're interested in doing. So that was my curiosity. I already told you about this mastermind. And if you're willing to answer these few questions, it would be very helpful for me, as I mentioned. So please go ahead and take a look at the links. It literally should not take you more than 5 minutes to complete the entire thing. And I think it'll be 5 minutes worthwhile because at least you get a feel for what it is that I'm talking about. All right, so now, finally, we are here at our session objectives. As you know, or at least those of you who are returnees are familiar with the fact that I love to start with objectives because this gives us a sense, did we actually accomplish something concrete? And when we look back at the end of the presentation, can we say yes to the questions that you are about to see? So objective number 1 is to review. When I say review, I'm assuming everybody here has some basic preliminary understanding and experience with Bloom's taxonomy. I can imagine that you all learned it minimally in college, if not before, and have been exposed to it. Maybe you're utilizing a little bit in class already. Just out of curiosity, with let's do a small one, with 1 being basically never, 2 being often, or average to often, somewhere in that range, and 3 being like all the time or very consistently. How would you rate yourself in terms of using Bloom's as a guide or as a tool in your lesson planning? Again, 3 is for people who are using it all the time. So 3 is the highest number. Okay, 2 is sometimes, and 1 is practically never. And honesty is appreciated here. So please don't feel any obligation to inflate numbers one way or the other. Just want to get a feel for what I'm dealing with. Looks like I probably can invite some of you here to actually do this presentation since so many of you are using it often. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do, I wasn't thinking about doing this, but based on the fact that so many of you are doing it and still showed up, while I read objective number 2, I'd like for you to put into the chat, what would you say is your biggest question about Bloom's taxonomy, and what would represent the biggest win for you in the time that we have remaining together? So what is it that I can address that will be most rewarding or beneficial for you in thinking about Bloom's taxonomy? It may be a question about understanding the levels better. It may have to do with implementation. It may have to do with differentiation. The question could be very different, everybody in their own way. But what brought you here? What is of interest to you? Okay, you talked about relevant activities, implementation. Thank you, Nasia. Okay, modern Blooms with technology, interesting. All right, Sarah, you're gonna have to make sure I stay on point with that. So please be persistent there to make sure that we are incorporating technology, or at least the ideas, in the 21st century classroom. Okay, to refresh all the time. All right, yeah, we definitely want to refresh and stay current. For those of you unfamiliar, thank you. I don't know if that's Lene, please, I hope I didn't mispronounce that, but thank you for your honesty and allowing us to all understand where you're coming from, okay? By the way, some of you are still replying to all panelists only, so please adjust to all panelists and attendees. Higher order language, PBL activities. All right, so I'm gonna do the best I can to address as many of these as possible, and more are still coming through, which is great. What I'm gonna ask you to do, please, is to be your own self-monitor, so to speak. In other words, you're gonna have to think a little bit on your own about how does this relate to me? What are the key takeaways? I'm going to be offering examples from a number of different subject areas, so that'll give you examples to work with, but you should have, and I hope you already do, a particular lesson in mind, okay? If you didn't, quote unquote, come with that, which is okay, because I don't think I asked you to, minimally, I'm gonna ask you to do that now, all right? You might even wanna put that in the chat. So you might wanna say, A couple of words about a math lesson you're planning on teaching without getting into details about it. Whether it might be something very short about geometry or something very short about a science lesson or something else you plan on doing, so that you have real clarity for yourself on what can I do with this lesson or this particular activity and incorporate more of Bloom's higher level cognitive thinking and activities into that lesson. All right, that's an important piece. So again, objective number one is to review the lesson, review the levels, as well as related activities and question stems. What that means is, if I tell a student to classify, right, what level of Bloom's taxonomy does that intersect with? If I say compare or contrast, use a Venn diagram, where does that intersect? So that would be an activity. A question stem would be more asking a question that begins with certain things. So they're really two sides of the same coin. But it's basically, what are the activities or the questions that I ask that already are kind of in line with Bloom's, and where do they intersect with Bloom's? And we want to make a very compelling case, at least I would like to, that we want to move as much as possible from the base of the pyramid, we'll talk about that soon, to the higher parts of the pyramid. Obviously, there's a pyramid for a reason. And actually, we've talked about that before. I'll come back to that soon, why specifically that shape was chosen. And then number two is to incorporate each level into an upcoming lesson or unit. So that's what I mentioned before. So think about your lesson, think about a unit. It doesn't mean that every lesson has to intersect with all 6 levels. So that's why I put the word unit in there. You might do it over 2 or 3 lessons, for example, but so long as somewhere in this unit, you are intersecting with different levels of Bloom's, you are doing an effective job at implementation, okay? So here are the objectives. I want to be able to say yes to all 3 of these. So will we be able, at the end of this time together, number one, now I'm not going to ask you to do it by heart, right? We're going to do this quickly, and we're going to be limited in how much we can internalize. But minimally, if you look at it, that you could obviously read the words, but briefly describe what each of those 6 levels are. That's number one. Number two, to identify some appropriate activities or questions that you could be asking for each of those levels. And then finally, number three, to incorporate it into the lesson. And as with many of my webinars, we only have an hour together. There's a lot of homework that you could and hopefully will be doing that's going to take your learning to the next level. Whatever we get out of this time is hopefully valuable for you. But as you know, as educators, if you're just listening, or even if you're watching a PowerPoint, your retention level is relatively low. And you're going to forget quickly a lot of what we're describing. Obviously, if you grab the recording that I'll be emailing to you, you can listen to it again. But if you want to really internalize this content, you need to be using it. And frankly, the ideal way is to teach with it. And what a gift and blessing that you all have, that you can be using this in your lesson later today or tomorrow or the next day. But please do use it, because if you don't use it, you will lose it in many cases. Okay, so thank you all for your responses. I saw a few more, I didn't comment on them, but I am monitoring the chat, and let's keep the conversation going. But I'm still noticing a bunch of you are all panelists only. Please go now into your chat and make sure that at the bottom it says to all panelists and attendees. Now, I am going to show a brief video. I've had pretty good success, I think, in terms of the audio piece of this. Let me first get it to the right place, and then I'm going to ask you to help me make sure that we can all hear it. Okay, so I assume that you can see it. Let me play it and see what happens.
1950s, American education psychologist Benjamin Bloom.
Just pausing for a moment. Were you able to hear that? Please say yes or no so that I can continue. Okay, fantastic. So she just started off saying that in the 1950s, American psychologist Benjamin Bloom, and we will now continue.
Determined that there are 6 categories of thinking. Remember, understand, apply, analyze.
Sorry about that, just a moment.
In the 1950s, American education psychologist Benjamin Bloom determined that there are 6 categories of thinking. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, And design. When your teacher asks you a question, what they are really asking you to do is think within one or more of these categories. For example, if your teacher asks you, what is the capital city of a country? They are asking you to think at the remember level and to act like a database, such as a Google search engine, and recall the name of the capital city. There are some great tools to help you remember information. For example, if you were required to remember the names of the 8 planets in order from the Sun, you can use the thinking tool called a first letter mnemonic with my very eager mother just served us nectarines. The first letter of each word reminds us of the planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. There are lots of other great memory tools, such as the alpha ladder, acronyms, rhymes, and flashcards. Why not try creating a transfer booklet? All of these tools will help you at the remember level of thinking. At the understand level, you are asked to act like an expert. Aha, I understand this. I could explain how this works and describe this carefully to someone else. Similarly, there are some great tools to understand information, such as the cause-effect map, concept maps, and the Y chart. At the apply level, you're using all of your existing knowledge and applying it in a new situation. For example, you may know the mathematical rule for finding the area of a rectangle. If someone asks you to find the area of the school car park, you can apply your existing knowledge to find that out. Have you ever been asked to think critically about a topic? Critical doesn't mean thinking negatively about something. In fact, critical thinking involves balanced and considered decision-making and is at the analyse and evaluate levels. To analyse something, try breaking the topic or issue into component parts and carefully examine each of these parts as if you were looking at each through a magnifying glass. Once this is complete, act like the scales of justice to weigh up the evidence of your research and make a decision or recommendation based on the information collected and organised in the analyse component of your thinking. This is the evaluate level. Here's a hint. Use the thinking tools at each of these thinking levels to make critical thinking even easier. We finally arrived at the creative thinking level, design. Acting like an inventor and coming up with new products, ideas, and ways of doing things can be sometimes difficult. Find inspiration, organise your ideas, and get creative using the thinking tools at the design level. Thinking can sometimes be challenging, mysterious, and complex. However, when we know the level of thinking and when we use the appropriate thinking tools, life becomes that much easier.
Okay, so I hope you were able to hear that and that it provided some useful information for you. Just curious to know, what would you say was your biggest takeaway from that initial presentation that gave you a little bit, that overview video that we just watched? Anything in that video? It is interesting, by the way. I believe that they used, I'm trying to remember what she used instead of create. She may have written the word design, which is a bit of a change. But outside of that, I think she followed pretty much the same set of levels that we're accustomed to. Any takeaways from the video before we continue? Okay, a good overview of the background. Yes, that is true. Thank you. And while you're responding, I'd like for you to take a look. I'd actually like to spend a few minutes on this slide, right? Mastering lower levels in order to reach higher ones. That's an important piece. Some examples of strategies. I will try to share that link with you where I got it from. I did find it on YouTube, so it shouldn't be too difficult for you to find. And I do want to mention that Okay, anyone who is having issues with hearing, someone's or texting me, there will be a recording where you can, or a link to the recording, you can get access to it. All right, so very quickly, the history of blooms, for those of you not so familiar, the old version is on the right in this case, and the new version is on the left. I do want to point out that in the subsequent slides, sometimes the lower skills will be on the bottom, which is technically where they belong. In some cases, they will be presented first on the top, and then work your way from top to bottom. Sometimes the new will be on the left and the old will be on the right. Like in this case, sometimes it might be reversed. So do pay attention to what you are looking at. At its core, the old version was based on nouns. The new version is based on verbs, okay? So knowledge became remembering, comprehension became understanding, and so on and so forth. A couple of core changes: synthesis in effect disappeared and was replaced by creation, and evaluating was knocked down one level by Bloom's student, Lauren Anderson. Okay, now it's interesting. I'll just tell you a quick story that may be relevant here. When I was finishing a degree in my first master's degree, which was a degree in high school instructional degree for high school social studies. And I was living in New York. I got married to my wife. She's in Chicago. And so I finished my final coursework in a suburban school in a town called Schaumburg, Illinois, which is just northwest of Chicago. And the reason that that's relevant is because Schaumburg is also the home, at least it used to be, of Motorola, the famous phone manufacturer and IT company. And so this professor that I was talking to was teaching methodology of social studies, which was very relevant to me, had a conversation with an executive over at Motorola. And this goes back to the very late 1990s. I'd like to say it was 98, maybe 99. And the executive said to this professor, you know, you guys in education, you have it all wrong. And he was very defensive, of course, and bewildered. What do you mean we have it all wrong? He was very proud of his work. And the executive continued and said, because you teach everybody to just know information, to own it on their own, not to share it. Sharing is cheating, this kind of thing. But we in corporations, we in work environments, we need collaboration. We need creativity. We need people who are going to think out of the box and beyond the box and do things differently that are going to create the solution to the next problem. And it's interesting, that became known as 21st century learning, which is a little bit ironic because, of course, if I was sitting here in the year 1920 and I told you this is 20th century learning, you'd look at me like I was crazy, especially from the vantage point of the end of the 20th century. But we do know that 21st century learning at its core is about collaboration and creation. So that has been the information that has been updated in order to reflect, I think, this next step of learning that we as teachers really need to be promoting. All right, so let's take a look at the bottom, because I think that this is very valuable. Realize that this is sort of a mirror effect. So now remembering, which is the lowest level in the new version, is the first one that you see when talking about the description. So we have a definition, and then we have some verbs. Okay, can the student recall or remember the information? I would argue, yes, this is the most important foundational piece. If I don't know the information, I can't do anything with it. That, by the way, is the reason as to why it's a pyramid, right? Because I need the foundation, and then as I kind of work my way up, I don't use necessarily all of it, but I use some of it in very specific kinds of ways, and I do it for perhaps a little bit less of the time. So you may be familiar with a woman by the name of Kathy Nunley. I haven't seen her name in quite some time, but when I was just getting started in education, she was extremely popular, and she talked about, I'm forgetting even the term now, but it was really all about choice. And she created a classroom, in effect, and those of you who are familiar, you can certainly put it into the chat. But basically, she wanted her students to complete, I think it was about 70% of their work on the remembering, understanding, and applying levels. So that means that if all you did was demonstrate capacity and earn points towards remembering, understanding, and applying the information, you would get a C. Now, it's interesting, before I continue, that typically speaking, grades are top down, right? Everybody starts with an A, and you kind of work your way down until you settle somewhere. Unfortunately, some students settle well below, but we start off with the highest mark, from her perspective, everybody had to kind of build their grade. I think that's a very powerful concept if you think about it, because it's giving the students real ownership of their process. And frankly, it makes a lot of sense, right? You don't earn anything in real life until you do the work. So why not be the same way in school? Do the work, watch the video, take the, write a test, study with a partner, whatever you can earn credit for, build your grade step by step until you get to the grade that you desire. Now, the balance of that, the final 30%, after she did the 70% on those lower levels, those were achieved with activities that existed in those top 3 cognitive levels. I hope I'm making sense here. So if you did an analyze related activity, an evaluate, let's use the modern version, an evaluating activity where the student evaluated the information, made some decisions, made some critical analyses, this kind of thing, they would earn more points. And then the cherry on the top, so to speak, would be the creating piece. And that would be the final 10 points of the grade. So she would, like I said, build the grade using different types of activities, different things students could select, but it wasn't just 100 points all on the remembering level or 100 points all on the lower levels. There needed to be a sampling, there needed to be activities, there needed to be growth on all of the different levels for a student to maximize their score. Does that make sense? Am I being clear here? And if the answer is no, can you clarify what needs to be more clear? And I'll watch for your notes as I continue to explain these various pieces over here. Okay. Now, again, if anybody wants to search for Kathy Nunley, there is a name for it. And again, I'm forgetting it. I should know it by heart because I've used it so many times, but at this particular moment, it's escaping me. Anyway, so there's remembering, where I know the information, I can define a term, I can list all the different names of the states or whatever it might be. In her case, she used an acronym, something similar. Understanding is already where I'm doing something with the information. I can explain it. I've quoted to you, I think before in a previous webinar, what a teacher of mine used to say, which is if you cannot say it, you don't know it. What he meant by say was to explain. Right? If you can't explain something to something to someone else, genuinely at your core, you're not clear. And by the way, the clearer you are, the longer you will retain. And the higher you demand from your students on a cognitive level for their respective selves, in other words, for where they are, the more you push them. And the more you ask them to do more demanding activities, the better they will retain the information and with greater clarity. Now, I think I've mentioned this before, but it's absolutely critical from my perspective that all lesson planning must begin, number one, with the end in mind, right? What are my objectives? What are my goals? What am I trying to achieve? That's number one. But we also want to plan for retention, right? It would be silly for us to spend all this time teaching information and then the students don't retain it. Right? You've asked questions. I'm sure you've all had this experience before where you've tested students and they've demonstrated mastery. And a week later, you ask a question about it and it's right out the window as if they never heard it before. And that's unfortunate. And to some degree, that's on the students because we can only do so much. But a lot of it is on us. And if we are providing it in a clear way and it's demanding and we do the right things, and on top of it, we provide opportunity for review, another part which is going to create real opportunity for retention, because we know that if you do real good, strong learning at the beginning, and then a lot of review, and then a little bit of review, continuous review, ongoing, spread out over more time, as time continues, that information will still be retained. So we can be very strategic about what we teach, as well as how we're going to plan for retention, whether it's a couple of questions at the end of a homework sheet, whether it's a few minutes once or twice a week for brief review of previous learning. We can do it if we are strategic and thoughtful about it. Layered curriculum. Thank you. Is it sure? I don't know if, how you pronounce your name. I apologize. If it's Sherry, thank you. If I mispronounce it, I apologize. But layered curriculum is correct. Okay, layered curriculum is correct. Those of you who want the certificate, I will try to share the link again later. It is on my toolkit page on my website, but I will share that link a little bit later. Let's continue for now. So that's remembering, and that is understanding. Now applying. Okay, so you see a variety of verbs that you could be using. If I want to illustrate, maybe for example, I want to apply a civics lesson to a to signage, public signage, let's say, something related to, public safety or something like this, or I want to operate a machine based on a concept that I learned, or I want to solve a problem based on a mathematical concept or principle that you have shared. So as we are, let's see over here, can I provide examples of projects or assignments that might use the taxonomy, maybe using COVID as a topic? Okay, maybe Kelly will be able to work on that together. Okay, so what are some assignments, what are some activities we could be doing that relate specifically to COVID? All right, so we can go through this list and maybe answer your question as we do it, right? Define what COVID is and list maybe some of its core principles, or the individuals who are highest at risk, whatever it might be. Okay, I might describe it to somebody else, or maybe participate in some kind of conversation. Maybe I'll have students participate in some kind of either debate or or some kind of panel where each of them is focusing on a different element specific to COVID-19. Maybe, you have a quote unquote health expert, and maybe we've got a mayor or somebody running a city. Maybe I've got a school principal, maybe I've got parents, and different people with different perspectives based on the information that they already have. That would also be relevant for a demonstration as we look at application, right? Dramatizing a situation, dramatizing the issues, dramatizing why this is a problem, the effects on the economy, the effects on people's health, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I'm looking at some of your comments. I'm not responding right away because I don't want to do too much too quickly. As we move on in the chart over here, we've got analyze. Remember, we're moving now from the lowest level to the highest level, but we're going from top to bottom. So we're at the fourth one, which is green, analyzing. All right, can we distinguish? Can I distinguish between, the Spanish influenza, for example, with the current influenza, general flu with coronavirus? Can I compare their qualities? Criticizing public officials, criticizing readiness, differentiating between the approaches, let's say, for example, in Israel or Italy or the United States or Canada or certain other countries in the world and certain other states or other areas of the world, and how people have done things differently. I hope you're already seeing examples of how we can quickly just apply this to obviously a very big, robust, juicy topic, right? COVID-19 is about as ripe for conversation and learning as there is. It's relevant. It's something that's episodic, or we're experiencing it firsthand. It's affecting everybody in some way, directly or indirectly. Nobody is completely immune to its effects. So it's very, very easy to talk about COVID-19 and kind of get into it. Something which is very narrow by relative standard, for example, geometry, right? Or something much more specific, there we have to be more creative in thinking about how do I apply this. The good news is if you go online, you can find Bloom's taxonomy applied to so many different areas. You really don't have to reinvent the wheel. In most cases, if you type in, second grade math, something more specific, and then Bloom's taxonomy, you will get something. It may not be exactly what you want, but in most cases, you'll be able to find something that will trigger your mind. And I would say first grade, third grade, go a little bit up and down on the grade levels, be flexible there. Maybe in a different country, they're teaching it at a different stage, but this way you can find out what some of your colleagues are already doing, and you don't have to reinvent that. I hope that that is clear and useful and makes sense to you as you're thinking about it. Let's go a little bit further, and then I'll come back to some of your comments, assuming that I can still find them. Evaluating. Justify a stand, take a position. Do you think that Donald Trump has effectively led the United States through coronavirus? Don't answer that here, by the way, unless you really want to. But the idea is that you're asking them to evaluate and then support their reasoning. You're asking them to justify a behavior. You're asking them to go ahead and, assess it in some kind of way. You want to assess different presidents and who is a greater president and why, or you want to assess different seasons and which one would you rather be, if you could make one season a 4-season-a-year reality, right? In other words, if spring would be the reality for everybody all year long, or summer all year long, which one would you choose and why? Right? Or if you want to say, I want to live in New York versus Chicago, or Los Angeles versus Paris, right? Where would you choose to live and why, based on the information that you were given? and utilize real criteria. By the way, the more that you could be clear on what it is you want your students to do and what it is that you'll be looking for with rubrics in particular, you will help your students tremendously. We all have information, but we oftentimes don't know how to access it, or we don't know if the information that we need is the information the teacher is looking for. And I have a daughter, for example, sixth grader, wonderful, very studious, does great in school, but she is struggling right now in this remote environment for a variety of reasons, but specifically there's a gap, and I see it between her notes and some of the activities the teacher is asking her to do. And I don't know what created the gap. I don't know if it was the note-taking. I don't know if it was the way it was presented in class. I'm not sure. But when there's an absence or lack of clarity, the lack of connection, of symmetry and all of that, it can make for anxiety, it could make for confusion. And we as teachers don't want to create confusion. We want to create a clear pathway towards success. So these are important pieces here. And I really appreciate, by the way, Elvis, it's a pleasure. I know some of you personally. Dr. Epps, great to have you here. And please do comment, all panelists, all and attendees, because I think that it's important that everybody see that. But either way, the point is, Nancy, great commenting over here, and I see some of you are contributing directly to this. Please do share. What are you using? How are you making this list work for you? And so it shouldn't just be what Naftali Hoff happens to think. It should be what we as a community are sharing that is providing value to each other, and on top of it, practical, tactical, and useful ideas that you can incorporate in your lessons today and tomorrow, etc. And then finally, creating. Having your students make something, construct something. It doesn't have to be a physical thing, although it certainly can be, right? It could also be a concept. I think if you create a visual, maybe even make a graphic organizer, there's an element of creating if you're asking your students to create the framework as well as to fill in the content. If they're just filling in the content, usually that's more understand or apply or maybe analyze. So a regular graphic organizer would not necessarily demand the highest levels of cognitive thinking. But if you can develop creative ways where students are formulating new laws or writing new poetry or developing concepts or designing a new spaceship or designing a new cure for corona, going back to that for just a moment, or a way by which countries can be sharing information moving forward and strategies to make sure that this kind of global pandemic never occurs again because we have types of cooperation and types of idea sharing, et cetera, et cetera. This is where you're asking your students to be creative in real life problems. Somebody mentioned PBL at the beginning, right? This is problem-based learning at its core. New York City, Mayor de Blasio was talking about this today, about how they felt they couldn't rely on the federal government and others to provide them with enough ventilators. And so they started to make their own. They made their own masks. They made their own things because, as you know, in the United States, New York is really the epicenter of corona thus far, and it's been very tragic. And obviously this is the community in which I live, and it's been very, very difficult for so many people. But sometimes you need to be creative because you need to solve a problem, and you can be the only one, so to speak, to go ahead and do that. So I feel that if you kind of take a snapshot here, maybe even literally a screenshot, but the more important thing is if you capture this slide and get the essence of what it contains, everything else is application. Everything else, as we talk about in subsequent slides, is moving the needle forward in specific content areas. We don't have the time to go through this in great detail. Usually my webinars are much longer seminars or workshops, but these are compressed, and I hope you understand in the context that I have to be selective. Here again, first of all, we're working with the old Blooms in this one, so it's noun, not verb-based, and the lowest levels at the top, so that I'm clear. So knowledge would be, again, recalling specific facts. When did the war happen? The Civil War. Who was the president? Confederacy, the Union, that kind of thing. Comprehension. Why would Americans want to fight against each other? And that could be true about any civil war. It could be true about any situation. Why would people want to do what is occurring, was occurring, et cetera? Going down the list for a moment. Applying is generalizing, right? Using abstract information. So it could be plotting on a map, it could be creating a timeline, it could be applying a concept that existed during the Civil War to a later period in United States history or history in a different part of the world, right? Applying concepts from one situation to another. Analyzing, right? What were the subparts of the situation, right? What caused the war to begin? What were its main drivers, its main causes. What were the main features of a particular battle? Synthesizing is bringing it now all together. So what caused Lee to surrender at Appomattox, right? What factors? It wasn't just one thing. It was this and this and this all together. That's a synthesis of different pieces of information. Or describing his personality based on letters that he wrote, memoirs that people wrote about him, information that we have, bringing it all together, describing a person, describing a leader, describing a scenario, a situation, an event, this kind of thing. And then finally, evaluate. Did Lincoln make the right decision, right? Was it a mistake to leave the generals in for so long? Should the war have been fought to begin with? Was there another way to solve this problem? These are forms of evaluation. Okay, so please do keep your comments coming if you have anything to add, but in the interest of time, I want to make sure that minimally I hit on at least some of the core areas. That was history. Here's one on math. We'll touch on ELA and reading comprehension in particular in just a moment. Okay, so again, starting from the top, which is knowledge, working our way down to evaluation. In this case, we're talking about measurements of a two-dimensional shape, like perimeter or area, when the shape is changed in some way. So what does that do to the measurement of this particular shape? Okay, so again, you've got the level on the left, you've got the description next to it, and then the application. Something as simple as what are perimeter and area, right? What are the ones of this particular shape or these shapes? So I'm going a little bit further with it. I understand what it is that I'm looking at. I'm applying it by talking about how perimeter and area compare to one another. So I'm generalizing using the information I have to make a particular application. And as we move further along in these examples, you see how the complexity continues to increase, right? You're asking them to do something more. It's not as obvious. The answers are not in front of them. They have to sort of extract it or combine it or judge or rate or rank or something along these lines and do something with it, right? That is meaningful. And by the way, if you could have your students sort of act out even something like a mathematical concept in some way, right? Maybe, for example, that you have a number of students make a rectangle. Maybe it's 4 students, for example, okay? And then you add some shape to it. Now 2 students have to move further away because you've made it longer. And now you go ahead and you calculate. But you physically move them in the math problem, if that's making sense. Have them become actors in the scenario, make it relevant for them. Now, virtually, this is a harder thing to do, but even virtually, potentially, if you've got them on camera, you could have them take a couple of steps. You won't see them all together, but it may visually, in their mind, be able to capture the concept. Okay, so that's an application for math. Now, the next one I want to warn you is really hard to read because there's a lot to it, but we can at least try. Now, you'll notice in this one, the level goes from bottom to top. And this one is the newer version of Bloom's, so it's now in verb form instead of noun form. Okay, now RI stands for, all of a sudden I got a little something here blocking my, sorry, I can't really even see it for the moment. So apologies, I have a little blockage here. The RL stands for reading literature. The other one might be information, I forget. Okay, but either way, there's a little tag there, RI or RL, on the left side of each one where it talks about sample questions. So here, it's not presented as verbs, it's presented as questions that you might ask. So simply, who are the characters in the story? What was the main idea of the article? Can you give an example of, right? Thank you, reading informational text, thank you, right? That's what we're doing all the time. We're constantly reading, and we need to be reading, and even this is true, by the way, for videos or anything where stories are presented or content is presented. These kinds of questions are relevant and useful. You could be asking these, of course, about this webinar, right? What was the main point of this webinar today? And going up the list for a moment, utilizing a certain term maybe that I referenced, layered curriculum, right? What does layered curriculum mean? Or summarize the main idea of what this webinar was here to accomplish. So you can see the application here is not limited to a book that you open with text that you're reading or pages that you're reading online. It has relevance to other areas as well, okay? And as you move up along the application, right, rewrite it in your own words or rewrite it for a student in a simpler way or rewrite it for somebody in a more complex way. Or maybe change the outcome of the story or do something that manipulates it. Right? What would a sequel look like of this story? Right? What my kids were just watching, I know we're a little bit late to the party, Frozen 2. right? So I don't know when it came out because frankly, the whole thing is a time warp for me. But, you know, so what would the sequel look like? Obviously, there's one version of that story. Maybe you'll write a different version based on what you know from the first version. All right, analyzing, evaluating, creating, as you see, as you move up in this case, the information is more complex. Compare this article to a different article or video, right? How would the character change from the beginning of the story to the end of the story? Did the author do a good job? I'm evaluating the author's performance, right? Do you agree with the actions of the character? Do you think that this content is valuable for us to learn? If you were a teacher, would you be teaching this, right? And why? You know, there's so much there. So Yitzhak, I'm taking a look at the question, is there in Bloom model a stage during which a student is learning? Well, so I'm not sure if this is what you're asking exactly, but there are other, I didn't mention this, and thank you for triggering this. There are other taxonomies for affective learning as well as psychomotor learning, okay? So it's not just, this is the cognitive stuff. So this is mainly about knowledge and information and how our brain processes things. It's not so much about the affective, which is more social, emotional, and, you know, morals and values and things like that. I hope that that was at least somewhat responsive, and you can follow up with me afterwards if you want an access to that taxonomy. You can email me. I'm happy to send you. I happen to have those as PDFs. I'm happy to share those as well. Okay, and then creating, as you can see, I don't have to read everything for you. I think it's pretty straightforward. The idea is having students do something on their own that goes beyond what you have given them. All right, so hopefully from these 3 slides, we did one on history, the Civil War, one on math, and one now on literature and informational text. You get a feel that in different subject areas, you could be utilizing Bloom's to really engage your students at different levels. One last one, which I thought you'd all appreciate. This is, it looks simple, but I think this is actually for a slightly more advanced audience. A lot of them are underlined. This is a screenshot, so I did not underline these, and there are some verbs here that are not underlined. I'm not sure why. But the bottom line is, you will see, again, starting with remembering at the top this time, which is the lowest level, go into creating at the bottom. This is the new version of Bloom, so it's in verb form. You'll notice that at the beginning, it's list and draw. Describe already, I'm not sure, maybe belongs in understanding, right? Collect pictures, that would make sense as remember, okay? But thinking about what we're asking our students to do as they are creating a travel itinerary. I may have mentioned this before in a webinar about a history itinerary that I created with a travel machine. It's actually very complex and wonderful. It was actually like the highlight of the history class that I taught. But you can see how anything from current events, and by the way, travel incorporates math and incorporates, you know, social studies, incorporates in many cases science, understanding weather and other considerations. So there's a ton in something like this that could hit on a variety of different subject areas. And if you're mindful of Bloom's as you work your way through, you'll make sure that you can hit on the variety of different points in a way where all students are being engaged and learning. Because remember, some students may not remember, quote unquote, all that well, but ask them to draw something, ask them to create something, ask them to really problem solve, they're all over it. We all know, and I've mentioned this before, how many of our students, if we've been in the business for a while, when they, quote, grow up, graduate, move on to the real world, how many of our average to below average students become, you know, successful business rock stars, let's call it, or just successful in life because their talents and their abilities did not necessarily manifest in school the way that life created the platform and the canvas, if you will, for them to do their best work. So that's what we want to be doing as well. Now, very quickly, I don't want to get into this, but as you can see, this is the depth of knowledge from Webb. This was developed in the early 2000s. It's a similar concept to Bloom's taxonomy. The levels go from left to right. And if you look at the keywords at the bottom, you will see that in many ways they align similarly with Bloom's. There's a certain continuity to depth of knowledge, which I think is good. In other words, I think it circles back through content in a way that Bloom's doesn't necessarily do, but it does still talk about how we have to build our knowledge through levels of depth from foundation all the way up until we have the real deeper connections that are necessary to take learning and apply it in a concrete way in any situation or circumstance in which we are discussing. Okay, so when should we use Bloom's? I think you know the answer, but I'll go through it anyway. Part of our day-to-day instruction, it should be every day we sit down, we look at it as one of our key tools and say, how am I incorporating Bloom's into my lessons? Where did the various questions, where do the various activities intersect to make sure that we're not just hanging out down here at the bottom, remembering and understanding, we're really engaging our students for all the reasons I talked about: clarity, retention, etc. It's a great way to differentiate, especially for our gifted students. I've mentioned this before. Some of our students are just being under-engaged, right? They become the glorified teacher's aides and they're running to the office for copies and they're helping the extra student, who's weaker get his work done, but they're not being engaged at their level because we're not really thinking about what they need. So differentiating for the students who need more support, making sure they have the foundation, making sure that the students who are at a higher level and can do it are moving forward towards something more meaningful, and adjusting as a result, maybe our grading system and our expectations around what students are capable of doing based on our assessment of them. And of course, as I mentioned with Kathy Nunley, layered curriculum is a great way, for example, of offering choice. And when I have choice, I am engaged. When I have choice, I feel that my opinion matters. And when my opinion matters, I'm more invested. If I asked a question, if one of you, quote, raised your hand, and this was everybody, and you asked a question and I responded, the one person who's going to listen to the answer is the one who asked the question, because it's your question, right? So if you offer choice, that means by definition, you're creating an opportunity for me to feel that I'm not a passive participant. I'm not somebody who has to have everything dictated to me. I get to choose my pathway, and that's a differentiation conversation. That's, an authentic assessment, a formative. There's so much there, but at its core, what we're saying to a student is, I want you to learn this, but I'll give you different ways by which to do it and at different levels so that you can ultimately have choice in how this ultimately comes together. So the application of it, you want to ask yourself, what do my students need to learn? Now, at what level of cognition will they need to learn it? That's your Bloom's question right there. So what do I need them to know? That's the information. At what level of cognition do I want them to learn it? And then here's your application. What questions will you ask or tasks will you assign to ensure that the learning occurs? If you ask these 3 questions every time you teach, you will have much clearer and more effective lessons because you're hitting at the core of what education is about. As I mentioned, education is not about great teaching. Education is about dissemination and internalization of information by the student. If they're not learning, your teaching is irrelevant. So you have to ask yourself, how do I ensure maximal learning through the right processes that are going to get us there, and all of this that we have been discussing. Okay, so I hope that this has been clear. Bear with me for another couple of minutes if you don't mind. So here's a quick one, and you could answer them in sequence. So it could be yes, no, yes. It could be yes, no, no. It could be no, no, no. It could be yes, 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 right? Did we, number 1, list and briefly describe each of the 6 levels of Bloom taxonomy, old version, new version? Number 2, did we properly utilize related activities, or can we properly utilize related activities for each question level? And finally, can we incorporate each level into an upcoming lesson? Do you have a lesson in mind that you've been thinking about, that you're saying to yourself, oh, I could do this, and at this point I'm going to do this, and at this point I'll do that, and this way you are augmenting and raising the bar, if you will, of what you've already prepared to add layers, not only of choice, but layers of depth and cognitive demand so that your students really get the most out of a particular experience. Okay, great. I'm glad that there are a lot of yeses here. And if there are no's, I would accept it. Don't get me wrong. I'm open to listening. All right. Couple of more matters to wrap up with before we end. So please bear with me just a little bit longer. You may have gotten this in your email, but hopefully, if not, you can just go to impactfulcoaching.com/upcoming webinars. I'm going to be including all of these links in just a moment. So just you can go there and you can get all the information. I've got 2 new ones coming. Tomorrow there's one on goal setting, which I think is very powerful for all of us as individuals as well as professionals. So I'd encourage you to join me for that. It's going to be very practical on the topic of SMART goal setting. In addition, If you are able to come on Thursday, we have a one on teacher leadership. I presented this one live in Houston for ASCD a number of years ago, a very valuable piece. I think teacher leadership is important, maybe even more important than ever in this particular situation. We need all of you, everybody, to be the best leader you can be. I need to be the best leader I can be. And so we'll dive deep into what leadership is about and how we can make leadership more relevant for us and for our students. And here are a couple of links that I just put into the chat as well, ways in which you can help me support this mission. I plan to keep these webinars going as long as I can, as long as they are useful to my community. And so to help me make that happen, there are a few different ways. Some of you have been extremely generous. I've had donations from all over the world. They don't need to be big, but whatever you can do, whatever you feel comfortable with, there's a link to donate. Certainly would love to be able to participate in person, but even frankly, virtually. If your school is interested in professional development, something customized for your individual school, please have the right person be in touch with me on my website, and I'll be more than happy to talk about what that could look like. And I just wanted to add this one as well for those of you who have seen this slide before. I authored a book a couple of years ago called Becoming the New Boss. It's very relevant for anyone interested in leadership, school leadership and otherwise. It kind of talks about my story as well as what I learned, but really it's about walking new leaders from soup to nuts to ensure that they hit the ground running and enjoy sustained success. And if you are a veteran leader, no worries. Most of the content is relevant for you as well. You can grab a copy on Amazon, Barnes & Noble online, other places. These are all ways that you could help support my mission of making these webinars and other learning opportunities come to life moving forward. And that is it. Okay, so you have all the links you need over here. Be in touch. You know how to reach me if you can. There's certificate link. Okay, thank you for asking. I'm going to share that with you. That's the toolkit one. Bear with me for a second. Let me grab that for those who need. Sorry, I'm in the wrong place. Just another moment. Okay, here it is. Let's get that into the chat one more time. And I really hope that this was valuable to you. So thank you, thank you, thank you again for being here. And please tell your friends, sorry, let everybody know how much fun we're having. Let everybody know the value that we're sharing, the community that we're growing. Encourage them to show up. And even if they can't make it, if they register, they will get the recording. So I think from my end, that is all for today. And I look forward to seeing as many of you as are able tomorrow again. And hopefully we will continue to learn, grow, and support each other and pray for our well-being, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and to restore normalcy as soon as possible. Have a fantastic day. Keep growing and learning. Talk to you soon.